Welcome to Examining, a technology-focused podcast that dives deep. I'm Erik Christiansen.
And I'm Chris Hans.
All right, we're ready to start another episode of the Examining podcast. I'm Erik Christiansen, and I am here with my co-host, Kris. Good afternoon, Kris.
Good afternoon.
Does my mic sound okay? We're all good?
Yeah, we're all good.
I actually haven't adjusted it for months, so I hope so. I took the spit cover thing off, and I just have the fuzz on the end of it. So we'll see if this makes a difference. That thing was always in my face, so I just removed it.
Yeah.
Do we want to kick it off by talking about, is it AI hype, or do we want to start with mini computers, or did we want to start with, well, we have tip stuff. That would be at the end.
Yeah, no, totally. I don't know. I mean, I guess we could go with we can start off with this AI, which keeps happening. And, they keep talking about how there's everything just AI these days. So
maybe we could talk about, do you want to start? How about we start with Paul Thurrott's, because that's the most provocative. And
sure.
And then we can, because it kind of plays into the hype. So I mean, I have the premium subscription, so I can just kind of explain the article. But basically, he wrote an article. So Paul Thurrott, so I don't know, for decades he's been covering Microsoft and Windows. He's also a co-host of a great podcast at which he talked about this. I don't remember the episode, Windows Weekly. But he wrote an article, kind of a provocative one, called "I Will Not Pay for AI." And he kind of goes through the history of Microsoft. He talks about kind of their product history, the company's philosophy. But, he talks a little bit about what AI is supposed to be versus kind of what they're selling. So one of the things he says in this article, kind of the main point he makes, and the reason he won't pay for AI anymore, I think he was paying for kind of the premium versions of ChatGPT Plus and Copilot Pro when they first came out. Because of course he's like a journalist, right? He writes about it. But he said that these chatbots aren't really worth paying for, because while they do photos and they do some cool stuff, the real value of these generative AI products, I guess I should be more specific, is when they're kind of embedded into a product. So they're not a product themselves, but they kind of enhance existing products. And so his argument is that it's kind of like the MSG of of software as a service. And it just enhances it. It makes it taste better, even if it's not very good for you, I guess is what he's going for. So he's like, I will pay for products and services that use AI to provide real value, to make those products better and that come through on their promise. But he won't pay for them just as chatbots. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting perspective. I can see, especially, I mean, if you look at Microsoft strategy, and I think that is a good point of how he went through the history of how they've rolled out their products. It does kind of make sense, and plus it's a little bit different in this case because they're using us, and now, I mean, they've even made it free, right? So they've OpenAI has released their latest model and made it available without having to pay a subscription. Although there are limits, like you'll probably get throttled down so that you can't use the latest as much as the people who actually are paying for it. But yeah, I mean, I can see what he's talking about, because literally these chatbots are going and powering, or this generative AI technology it's powering other applications, and maybe for those applications you would go and pay for, and that's probably the more worthwhile side of things. I mean, it's even, I don't know if you saw or heard about this, but there's even people who are concerned that OpenAI may not even be around at the end of this year, because they're burning through so much cash, and Microsoft might not even bail them out, where they've given billions of dollars in the past. Because
yeah. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So I mean, and especially because it's interesting even just from a business standpoint, because they're working around those antitrust laws by first going in investing 49% into this not for profit, and so then
Well,
they're
the for-profit arm of the not-for-profit.
yeah, like and then not taking full ownership, right? So they take 1% less, and then on the other side they went and I forget the name of that company, but that Mustafa Suleiman took his whatever he was working on and hired all of them, and now they're part of Microsoft AI. So instead of acquiring them, he just hired a bunch. They just hired a bunch of people.
An acquihire, as they call it.
Yeah.
Just to flesh this out, one of the things that he talks about in this article, which was, by the way, I should say, was published on August 15th, so it's fairly recent. He talks about, Microsoft no longer has kind of a one and done, you pay for Office. And part of the reason is that they release new versions of Office, new features, but people don't necessarily use them. So in the past, they would use like these 10-year-old versions of Office because it did everything that they need.
Yeah.
So for the standpoint of recurring revenue, which I understand, they have Office 365. And in fact, I don't even pay very much for it. I think maybe because I have other subscriptions or because I'm an educator. I think I think the family plan costs me $75 a year. I think the individual 365 costs me $55 a year. Like it's not a lot of money, right? Yeah. So it is worthwhile for all the cloud storage, and it is a good service. But he says that he said it's not the 1990s anymore. He's like, not only do we as customers of technology have more and better choices, which there's lots of choices for writing and doing stuff, we also have a mix and match as we see fit. Those who pay for Microsoft 365 for the value they receive, as I do, can continue using its constituent parts as they wish, but they can get the functionality provided by Copilot from somewhere else. They're all alternatives, and now too many to count, many of which are as good or better than Copilot and less expensive or even free. So he's like, it's a different world. He also says later on here, he says, he's like, I'll pay for products and services that use AI and provide real value, but not pay for AI. And he's like, it may seem like a subtle distinction, but it's not. He said, Microsoft 365 grew from a modern version of classic Office bundle into an offering of such value that it became a no-brainer, because it is a very good deal, actually. But Copilot for Microsoft is a money grab, an overly expensive set of functional add-ons that should simply be included at no additional cost with the service. He's like, I'm already paying every single month for. Instead, Microsoft charges a 200 to 300% markup for Copilot per month. This is Copilot Pro to consumers and business users, respectively, while providing only minor advantages spread too thin across the services offerings, like too little butter across too much toast. And I think that's a really good description. So I tried it. I tried Copilot Pro. You watched me use it.
Yep.
And I really wanted it to work in a desktop app connected to the internet and be right there and work in context with my writing. I wasn't using it to generate images or to kind of be a general chatbot. It was like, analyze this, and it would get stuck. It wouldn't understand. Perhaps it's gotten better now. I tried it in Excel. I tried to select the data, and it didn't understand. It's like, no, I can't do that. And so it would have all these hangups, even though you were working within one document. Yeah. It just couldn't handle it. So I think he's right. I think it's the features that you get from it probably aren't worth $20 or $30 a month.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and that's where, like, even if you think about, like, with OpenAI, what they're doing is they're providing, and maybe who even knows what the actual terms are with, like, the Apple Intelligence, but giving that infrastructure and giving access to that to these enterprise companies to go and create new applications, that's probably a better business model for them.
Yeah. So I'll talk about this later as part of my tip, but in a contrast to this, and this is what we're talking about today, you and I want to focus on kind of the hype, like, where is this business model working? Where is it not working? I've talked about the product Notion on our podcast before. It's basically a note-taking to-do project management app. It's a terrific app. Big downside is that it has to be connected to the web. So even if you're using the desktop version, internet goes out. It's kind of like it's like working in Google Docs. Um, you can add on AI functionality, and I'm not sure if I'm getting it at a discount or whatever. And I think maybe it's like $100 for the whole year. And then the idea is that you're working in it. You can ask it questions. You can be like, here's my notes. Can you make a to-do list based on this product, project description? And it'll do it, and it'll nest the to-do list, and it'll do all this cool stuff. But okay, so let's say it's $99 a year. Plus, maybe you pay for the premium version. I have a little tip later about how to get around this if you're an educator. But it does pretty much everything that I would want Copilot to do in Microsoft Word. But Copilot for Microsoft Word is almost $30 a month.
Yeah.
So I feel like Notion is probably charging what they need to cover the data center costs from wherever they're getting their model from. I don't know if they're using ChatGPT or if they're using Anthropic's Claude, or I don't know what they're using, but it works well. It understood my prompts. And to me, like, that's a reasonable price. Like, if it's an add-on, I mean, he's saying it should be kind of built into things automatically, and they should just charge what it costs rather than try to have this multi-tiered add-ons and stuff. And I get that, but to me, that seems like a much better value.
Yeah. I'm surprised they don't do more of that. I mean, I guess these are like educator discounts too, right? Probably. But having, doing like a 20, I think these companies, a lot of them, they should start doing, instead, like maybe giving some incentive to even lock in for that year. Right. So maybe instead of being like $20 a month, now it's like $100 for the year or what have you, and then you're locked in. But who knows?
It's kind of like hosting, right? Like, like sometimes people pay monthly for web hosting. Like my Christiansen.net is hosted on WordPress. I have a portfolio that's .ca that's hosted by a company called HostPapa in BC. But they're all, if you pay for annually or multiple years at a time, you always get those services those web services at a discount.
Yeah.
I find the whole monthly billing is a bit of an issue. And in fact, I just wrote a blog article about this not long ago, talking about, I'm going to write a series about, I'm not suggesting that technology is all worse now, but there's certain things there was advantages to the way we used to do things even 10 or 15, 20 years ago. And one of the things I don't like is the subscription creep. Yeah. And especially like the different tiers, and then managing, and then, this is how much you pay. And then they nickel and dime you if you want to add for every extra user per month. And these things add up. And there was a CNET article. It was older. I can see if I can find it because it was linked to my the piece, which I can put in the show notes. I'll just bring it up here because it's pretty simple. And it said, according to CNET, and this article was from, it wasn't super old, but it wasn't super new. It was, it was April of this year, April 9th. They said that the average US consumer spends approximately $1,000 annually on subscriptions, including video streaming, music streaming, e-commerce. So that would include Amazon Prime, digital tools, groceries, you name it. Computerworld had a similar article, but that was from 2021. So maybe this has changed as a result of post-COVID, hard to say. And they said that the average US consumer spent $273 a month or $3,200 annually on subscriptions. That's a lot of money. Yeah. So, $30 a month is a steep price, or like $100 a year to use AI to a tool that's actually free for most people. Can you get away with the free tier is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, this is where, like, and part of it you have to understand too. I think for most people, like, the reason why these monthly subscriptions, just from an accounting perspective, it's easier for them to go and account for it. The revenue's coming in slowly. I mean, even if you think about it, let's say for instance, like Apple going and selling their iPhones through a telecom, they can't recognize, even though they sold that, $2,000 phone, they can't recognize that the income right away, because especially if it's on a financing thing, so they have to kind of gradually accrue that income, right? And so these are things that I think it just makes it easier for them, and the market likes it. But uh, you look at it from a customer's perspective. I mean, it was interesting, like recently. So, because I told you I'm going to be moving and so on, and so I've been looking at just the cable and the internet service and so on. And I found it really fascinating. There's these subscriptions that we have, like with Netflix and Crave and so on. And apparently, this was total. I did not know this whatsoever, and maybe this customer service rep, maybe it was misquoting this, or but you could, if you wanted to, you could change. Let's say there's some new season of Game of Thrones that comes out on Crave. You could turn on Crave for that, couple of months, or even you could actually even change it on a daily basis. So you've watched that movie, you call them up, or you can actually, I'd probably even just do it online. And then you've watched that movie, you're done. Now you switch to the other one, the other premium. So I don't know how many people do this.
But what do they charge you, a day's worth? They prorate it for like 24 hours.
Well, they're worth the same, right? So they're like, let's say it's $20 per month. So it works out being the same, but you could swap it out from one to the other. And so I guess maybe people are doing this. I never thought about doing that. I turn on the valves for both of them, so they're both running, and so I don't have to do these things. But
I think so there's been this move in technology, so software services to move to subscriptions. And I think these annual or monthly reoccurring costs are going to hit a wall depending on how the economy goes. Like, this just doesn't work. In fact, just talking to members of my family, like kind of the pillar for subscription entertainment is kind of Netflix. And I, of course, added multiple households, even though it costs money, because it's much cheaper for them to be on there for $7 a month per household than it is to, create their own premium account from scratch and stuff like that. Yeah. Right. And so most of my family, they just kind of reimburse me for the cost, which is perfectly reasonable. So that's the one we pay for, the highest tier of Netflix, just 30 something a month, but other ones, it's maybe worth subscribing to Prime. I subscribed to Prime because I wanted to watch the Fallout series.
Yep.
And we had to order some stuff for our kid. And so then it was worth it because we could get it right away, and it facilitates returns if there's a problem. But I'm not renewing it next month.
Yeah.
And so you can subscribe for as long as you can. But I think these companies are always trying to kind of get you on the hook for reoccurrent billing. They make it really hard to cancel.
Yeah.
They want you to forget about it, so you don't recognize it on your Visa bill. But if I was adding up, I remember I added up a bunch of charges, so little bits of software here or there, and I kind of made a big list on paper of everything I was paying for, because it was during our early days of when we were ed tech exam, but I was testing a lot of stuff, and it was well worth it. And I kind of added it all up, and I was like, okay, these are the ones I want to keep. And I was like, I can save $1,000 a year by canceling all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's $1,000 a year that goes into, your retirement fund or all that stuff, right? It adds up over time. So I'm wondering if AI is going to go that route. What do you think about, we talked about this because we did a presentation on it, but do you think that there's going to be continued growth? Because, NVIDIA has had this super growth because, they got lucky, because it turns out their graphics cards for their computers are really good for crunching numbers for AI. Yeah. But the data center costs are so expensive. I had read, and I should bring this up, and I did not put it in our pin board. I'll search it in a second, that Microsoft had spent $19 billion or something in capital for AI. I will double check this when next time I stop talking. Yeah. But so it's a huge capital cost So it makes sense why they're trying to, nickel and dime people for all these add-ons. But is this going to make sense in the long run? Like in the long run, and I mean, like even maybe even on a few years, aren't a lot of these AI things going to just be able to run locally on device?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the thing, right? Like, I mean, here everybody's they're buying into the hype. Everybody and their dog has gone into this whole AI large language models. And part of the presentation that we talked about was actually there's and even Microsoft they are investing in small language models, right? So there's and that you could probably run locally, because really you don't need, and this is where even if you look at OpenAI, how they've released their latest models, they have that mini one, they have that 4.0. You don't need access to billions of documents, depending on whatever your
Right.
task is, right? And so you can go and just populate it with the exact information that you need to create that language model, the data that you need just for that specific task. And so, and this is where I think Apple, it'll be interesting to see how they roll it out. I mean, they were in talks with both Google and OpenAI. They went with OpenAI to go and power their what they're calling Apple Intelligence. But they're at the same time.
Such a brilliant move, by the way. I just have to put that in, like calling AI Apple Intelligence and then co-opting the acronym for your own marketing. I can't believe nobody else figured this out. I guess they're the only company with an A that their company starts with, but still.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, now like, and it especially because of the processing power and so on, they will likely, this is what I mean, part of what we're both of us we've talked about this is that they will likely be able to go and run locally on their device, whether it's an iPhone or one of their Macs, and you'll be able to go and even just the way that their systems, their OS operates, it operates like a database. And that's where if you go into Finder, it somehow just searches not only all the files, it searches the text within the files. And so imagine you get the AI embedded where it's running locally based off of all of your files that you have stored on there. And, with their big privacy aspect, they're probably the only company, maybe again, this is where they could be they're always last to get into it. They look at how everybody else is doing it, and then they get into their executing on it. And they right now maybe it's just the using OpenAI's GPT to go and actually work on theirs, but they are developing their own at the same time. So who knows? Maybe that's a strategic move as well.
So I did that's a great point. And like, so they are typically last to the party, and then maybe it's more thoughtfully implemented. They seemed a little bit more clear about the privacy and what was on device, depending on which phone you have. I'll never see these things with my iPhone 15 non-pro, but I'm fine with that because I don't know if I even want this on my phone as somebody who's trying to get away from using their phone. I have a new M4 iPad Pro, so that's good enough.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So, but I'm going to come back to Microsoft. So they had a stock drop. This was July 31st. This is from Forbes. So they had great earnings that were reported in April, but their capital expenditures for AI. So they had 64.7 billion in revenue. They had $22 billion in net income. But their capital costs for AI surged, according to Forbes, to $56 billion. So I don't know if that's for the whole year or if that must be for the whole year. It couldn't just be for a quarter. I thought it was like way less for the quarter, but that's like a huge investment. And an absolutely enormous amount of money that they've had to reinvest, probably into their Azure cloud services, right? So they're going to have to recoup this investment somehow.
Yeah. And who knows, on top of it, that probably doesn't include the investment in OpenAI, which was 11 billion too, right?
No, yeah. So that would be separate.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting that's why I'm kind of, perhaps I'm misunderstanding the AI market. So I see the investment in AI. I guess like, the Copilot Pro and ChatGPT for making images and summarizing your notes isn't, there's a lot of AI heavy things that like they're investing in that because they're probably getting companies to use Azure to use AI and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So there's a lot more down the line. Maybe that's how Notion's AI works. They're pulling it from the server, so they're getting that money back.
Yep.
But while these companies are making these huge investments, I'll leave Apple out of it because they are doing a bunch of stuff on device. At the same time, Microsoft is, and we haven't really talked about this, maybe we can talk about it more next time because I haven't looked into it so heavily. It's really marketing this Copilot Plus PC. So the MacBook Air is like the computer to beat because it's Apple Silicon. It's all based on ARM. And now Microsoft finally has really compelling Windows notebooks. The Surface, the new Surface laptop, the Surface Pro, are powered by Qualcomm ARM chips, and they're really good. And they have an NPU, and they do all this stuff on device. So I guess I'm trying to wonder, where are they just charging people monthly for Copilot Pro and these chatbots while they can, and then they're hoping that most of that revenue will come from the enterprise, because eventually most of this stuff must just work on device, right?
Yeah. I mean, who knows? I mean, and then on top of it, like how I mentioned, now I remember the name too. So that inflection AI was
Yeah.
what Mustafa Suleiman had. So imagine hiring, these geniuses. I mean, he was one of the heads of DeepMind, right? So
Yep.
Google's AI. So now you've just hired, like, I don't know, 300 people from huge salaries. So now your
Yep.
op costs have gone up immensely too, right? So, but yeah, I mean, they're still figuring it out. And I think one of our articles, it looks like one of the only winners in this is the consultants like McKinsey. they're going and billing like crazy for people trying to go and implement these generative AI in their organizations, because everybody has to keep up with the Joneses and remain competitive.
It's also funny to me too, how, thinking again about local computing, and we're going to talk about microcomputing. So I think this is a good segue. Um, the Raspberry Pi, which people don't really think of as an AI machine, they have the newest version of the Raspberry Pi, which is just for people who don't know, is like a credit card sized microcomputer. You can put active cooling on it in a little case. It has USB ports, does everything. I think the fifth generation came out about a year ago, and it's just like leaps and bounds better performance than anything that came before it. So that's much newer than the one that I have. Um, you can you can get it. You can spend $50 to get this computer board with 2 gigs of RAM, or you can spend 60 for 4 gigs of RAM or six, and then you can get 8 gigs of RAM for $80. And this is the computer. But they released Raspberry Pi released an AI kit for their microcomputer. So I can send you the link. This is from CanaKit, which is a Canadian um, kind of computing distributor. This is where I typically would buy my Raspberry Pi from. They're actually really quite good.
Okay.
And so I think TOPS means trillion operations per second, right? So that's how they measure. Like these Copilot Plus PCs that are coming from Microsoft, I think they have to hit a certain number of TOPS. Like there has to be a certain um, amount of processing power that the neural engine can do to be able to do this AI stuff like locally on device. There's like a standard. This AI extension kit for the Raspberry Pi is $70, which is not a lot of money. And it does 13 TOPS. So it does 13 trillion operations per second on top of this credit size. And you can get these, and I have an older version, but you can get them with 8 gigabytes of RAM. And so I'm thinking you can get a computer. So for the cost of plus the case, let's say you spent $200 with a case and a cooler and a little SD card to install the operating system and the computer and the AI thing, you could have a legit desktop operating system with like an AI extension.
Yeah.
And you could run desktop Linux. You could probably do some AI. I don't know. I don't know enough about AI to do the projects for computer programming. Maybe you can run some of these chatbots locally. You can download like an LLM or a small language model and run it on device. But it just, I look at the cost of this stuff and I think either the cost of this stuff is going to go down, so there'll be more money to make on the server side, or there'll be less and less reason to do this stuff in the cloud.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, that's amazing. I mean, the other articles that we came across, like some of the things that they were talking about was this one article was just talking about how maybe a mini PC would be better than getting a laptop. Apple they're anticipating with their latest Mac Mini, it's going to be the size of an Apple TV. So, the Apple TV
It's
is
a lot smaller.
very small compared to, and which it's totally doable. I mean, if you think about it, your phones are so small, they are literally powerful as a computer. And so if you shrunk this down, you could literally for, a much cheaper, like fraction of the cost, it could be a much more powerful computer than what a laptop would have.
Oh yeah,
Right.
for sure.
Obviously, you'd have to go and plug it into like a monitor or what have you, but it does give you. I mean, that's something to think about. I mean, if it gets small, like how they are, they're making them much more miniature.
I'm thinking this might be the way to go, right? Like either get a MacBook. I mean, at this point, a MacBook Air for me would be more than sufficient. As they get more advanced, I don't think I'm going to get another Pro laptop again. I bought it for the ports. I like my M1 Pro. It's great. It'll last me a long time. Has lots of RAM, but I just don't see the value, the return. Even the ports, if I have to use an extra dongle just to have an Air plugged in that gets me identical performance, doesn't even need a fan. I'm not doing video editing except for recording this live. We're doing audio. So I think that's sufficient. But I think that the mini PCs is a better value because you're getting active cooling, which allows the computer to run hotter for longer. And the funny thing that this article that you gave us, so this is from PC Magazine, and they list a bunch of reasons why this is better. They point to a bunch of the AMG chips, like these Ryzen 7 CPUs. So these are all x86, aren't they? These are not even ARM-based computers. I'm pretty sure. So x86 is not known for being very power efficient, so it doesn't really matter in a mini PC. But I think a lot of these, like if you had these new Qualcomm chips in a Windows computer in a mini PC, there is a development kit that you can get that's like these new AI PCs. They basically what's in a laptop shrunk into a mini PC. Apple's is an ARM-based system. It's probably way more power. It'll probably last longer too.
Yeah,
I think that's probably the way to go.
Yeah. I mean, I've mentioned this before. If I was at Apple, I mean, it probably would cut into their margins and stuff. But remember how like they had like the iPod Shuffle? Imagine if you had like a PC that's that size, or like a Mac that was that size. It was literally had like a US. Well, now I guess it would be a USB-C, and or it could be an HDMI, I guess, part. But imagine you plug that into some screen, and literally this small little stick is what you carry around everywhere, and that's your device, and it just somehow syncs up with the cloud, the iCloud and stuff. I mean that would be amazing, right? Especially with I think for most applications is whether you're a student or just a general office worker, what do you really need access to? Is just some word processing files or Excel files, PowerPoint, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, and you make a good point. Like, so I haven't done a review of this. I suppose I can do a mini one now. I bought a M4 iPad Pro, the 11-inch again. and you can plug it into, so it's not quite the size of an iPod Shuffle, bigger, but much smaller than a laptop, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't have a keyboard attached. I can plug it in to my monitor. I can turn on Stage Manager, and I can use my external monitor as a proper external display connected to a mouse and keyboard via Bluetooth, and open windows and resize them and do everything. I
Yeah.
had not tested it trying to plug in like another um, uh, webcam or something like that to make it like a true desktop setup. But you can plug in external storage to an iPad. I'm pretty sure you could plug it into a dock that's plugged into other stuff and it would all connect. I don't know about a webcam,
Yeah.
maybe, but it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's probably as powerful as my MacBook Pro. And
And
it
that's
might
where
not have
like
as much RAM, but I mean, it's very simple, right? You can dock it into anything.
yeah, like imagine, and this is where I think these companies, I don't know, they when you have so much invested in their existing product line, but I mean, it's going to take somebody to go and re-envision. But why couldn't you? Why couldn't you just have this docking station that plugs in, and now it's just terminals? You just have a monitor. It's like a 5K monitor. You plug in whatever device that you have, whether it's this iPad or this little mini computer, and you can just put it in your bag and you're ready to go. You keep on the go, right?
When it's not unrealistic, because that's what we've been doing with laptops for a long time. I
Yeah.
mean, my work setup on a Windows laptop is very similar. I can take it home, I pull it out, I plug one cable into it, and I have display, audio, internet, external storage, mouse and keyboard, everything.
Yeah, totally.
And so there's no need to have a laptop. It's interesting that you talk about, we should probably come back to Apple. There was an article that you found from, I haven't heard of this, is 404 Media. I don't know this website very well, but it said, oh no, sorry, that's a different one. It's from TechCrunch. They talked about Apple Intelligence, because I guess people have access to Apple Intelligence through the iOS 18 beta and
Yeah.
iPad OS 18 betas. And so it sounds like it stumbles on swear words and controversial topics.
Yeah.
So they have a kind of all the disclaimers, like quality may vary, all the places where the AI system gets um, tripped up. It replaced shitty with crappy,
Yeah. Yeah.
something
Yeah.
like that, which is
Exactly.
pretty funny.
Well, see, this is again like I think you have to keep in mind,
They
right?
all do this.
Well, look at we remember when we were comparing ChatGPT, OpenAI's ChatGPT against Copilot, Microsoft's Copilot. These bigger companies, because they are publicly traded, they have a reputation, they put these guardrails on. So that's why like the ChatGPT, because I don't know, their structure is totally different. We've never seen any type of organization like this where it's a not-for-profit with a for-profit arm, and nobody even knows what's going on in that organization. And I mean, to the point where, remember, there was the CTO, she was asked point blank in an interview, hey, for your video generation, a generative AI tool, did you use YouTube? And she didn't know the answer to it. And they did use YouTube videos to go and power that,
Yeah.
right? And so that ability to go and ask for forgiveness instead of permission goes a long way, where you can go and push the boundaries, right? And so and that's why I think still to this day, probably, I mean, although we did come across another article of how Claude, Anthropic's Claude, is getting to the same level as GPT-4. So those are the kind of dominant LLMs out there. But again, as we've talked about, I think the future, it may not be these LLMs. We've already seen just it isn't scaling properly because the costs are so intensive, and they can't figure out how to go and even cover their costs for running these with the electrical and the water and like the data centers. And so now they're kind of having to reconfigure, and they're probably thinking, okay, well, maybe we don't need these billions of documents. We can just have like this million, and it can just sit on this on this smaller little device, because processing power has gone up. Right. And so, I'm not surprised at all that they've had issues with these controversial topics and swears, because Apple it's not in their interest to go and start getting into. Imagine if it started going and doing all sorts of obscenities and politically sensitive stuff. It could tank their stock price, and the same thing would happen with Microsoft.
I haven't played with Anthropic. I mean, you probably have to use the pro version to test it. And I think we do have access in Canada.
Yeah, now we do.
So I can't really speak to the quality of it. I would like to try it. I wish we could get sponsored to do a test. I really don't want to pay for more of these, but I've used a lot of them, and I've dumped text into them. I've asked them to read documents. And I haven't been able to find something that works as well as ChatGPT's 4.0. I mean, that's just my personal experience. So I don't know that it works. I mean, I even took handwritten notes and uploaded them to ChatGPT Plus, and it was able to do a very, very compelling transcription into text. Like, it was incredible. It wasn't something sensitive. It was just something I was taking when I was thinking, when it was something I've read. So
yeah.
I don't know. It's hard for me. Again, and I also think about these subscription services, and I think about, you build your own functionality and you get used to the interface. And I wonder if there's something, we've talked about this before. I don't know if there's like a lock-in with AI. I don't know if it's the same. My experience has been that the competitors I paid for just for testing don't even come close, personally.
Yeah. Well, and even like what you just mentioned, like, that's an interesting application of this generative AI tool. Imagine you have those handwritten notes, and it's just this is where I think that creativity aspect comes in, right? But taking a picture of that written text and then putting it into, let's say, the new multi-model, the 4.0, and just putting in even a crappy prompt, like, convert this to text, right? That's something that probably I bet you OpenAI didn't even envision this, that people would do this, that could actually recognize the text and then create the text in, typewritten content, right? And now you can actually imagine, as a student, or even if you're in the workplace and you see somebody's notes or what have you, you get them, instead of transcribing them and typing them from scratch, you can just get this device to do it, right? That's
I think there's a perception when I tell people I use it that I'm prompting everything I do and I'm not thinking anymore. But really what I do is I do all my own writing. I take all my own notes. But sometimes, if I want to write a blog article, I prefer to write it myself. I may run sections through it that I'm struggling with to get help with, grammar cleanup, but I don't really use it to replicate my writing. But I often take notes, and they're kind of all over the place because I don't want to stop during the writing process to organize. I just want to get all my ideas out, especially if I'm just, putting out kind of fragments. I haven't written the full text, the prose yet. Often I'll take that text and I'll add it into ChatGPT. I have a couple of prompts that I've saved, and I've asked it to kind of reorder it. And I've described, how I want the blog post to start. And so this is, make it, based on the description of what I'm trying to get across and the story that I'm trying to tell, provide some suggestions for how, the order of content based on my notes. I mean, that I find incredibly helpful, because it takes hours and hours to do that manually. And it provides often, I don't know if it's a better organizational framework, but and I don't always agree with it. And sometimes I'm like, I'll do it myself, but it provides a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's just there's certain tasks. I think this is where, like, that's a good point that you brought up, Eric. That people are misinterpreting how people are using these tools. But, like, for instance, here, I'll give you an example. I was chatting with my research assistant for how we're taking these generative AI writing tools and integrating it into the business communication course that I teach. And she was telling me about how her grandma, like, they're doing a reunion of the family. And so she taught her grandma hey, we're doing this thing, we're going to go on this trip and so on. And her plan was to go and research on the internet to figure out, like, all the places that you're going to go and see and blah, blah, blah. And so she showed him this thing, and now, like, the grandma is hooked. Like, she's going and figuring out an itinerary. Maybe some of the things are good, some are bad, but, like, how much time did that save?
But you can edit it, right? Like, I mean, if you cut
Yeah.
and paste 30 suggestions and you keep half of them, all you have to do is skim through the 30 and say, oh, I like this, I don't like that. And people don't think also follow-up prompts. They often, I see people use it, they prompt once. Well, I think people are figuring out the nuance of how to describe it. What tone do you want? I mean, you can do this all in one prompt, but they also don't feed it back in and get it to build something even better. So often, if it doesn't give me what I want, I'll be like, I like this, and this, but I don't like these things. Can you
Yeah.
give me better suggestions based on what I do like? And it'll come back and it'll do it again. And it'll be like, I like that. I have this other text that I decided I want to integrate. Can you do it in the same style? And it remembers kind of the conversation and it goes along. So I think that's the value of those kind of general chatbots, but it takes some skill. I'm still learning how to do it. Um, Uploading large documents and books that I've paid for that are reference guides and creating my own GPTs that only search those texts because I don't want to look through the index and stuff like that. Again, it took me some time, but there's training involved to be able to use it skillfully. I don't think it's so easy. Maybe it'll get easier, but I suspect not. I suspect that there'll probably always be some skill required, some precision in writing good prompts.
Well, and that's where, like, even that one article that I came across where it was talking about how academic institutions are probably even more important now than ever, because those skills, that critical analysis, critical thinking, philosophy, like those liberal arts, like crafting a question, those are things that are really important. And I don't think a lot of people are fully, like how you're saying, like I think they're probably at beginner level for even using these generative AI tools, and they don't even go further than that. And a lot of it is a mindset that you have to take this idea of just constantly there's going to be experimentation. Some things might work, some might not. And but I think there's really great applications. I mean, especially us as doing writing, and for anybody who's a writer, now you don't have to have writer's block. You should never have writer's block anymore. Because if you're stuck somewhere, you could just say, hey, I have writer's block and this is what I'm running into. This is what I'm working on. It'll give you in a minute or less a bunch of suggestions. And so you can keep powering forward.
I do wonder about writing though, and I wonder that I do like the suggestions it continues to give me. There is a sort of skill to coming up with ideas kind of out of the blue. I do wonder if and you and I talked about this when we presented on AI at our faculty retreat conference. I do worry about kind of the skill and the craft of being able to write things by hand without necessarily thinking about the relying on some sort of thing to prompt me to think of something.
Yeah. Well, and again, there's so much that we don't even know about just with the human. That's why I always with especially my students, I always tell them we have this AI, but you know what the most powerful AI is the human brain, because even us as humans, we don't even fully understand it. But I mean, think about and there's proven now, like there's scientific studies, when you aren't even using your brain, you're going on those walks, all of a sudden it's somehow you come up with those ideas. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that taking time away. There's actually a great book I just finished. It's not related to tech, but it talks about some of that in another context that you may find interesting. I guess I can highlight it for people who are listening today. I'll just bring up my day one journal here because that's where I keep my book notes because they're private. Maybe I'll do a blog post about it. It's by a Zen Buddhist named Haemin Sunim, and he wrote a book called When Things Don't Go Your Way. And he talks about getting out of the house and walking and talking about the value of the calm space between all our ideas. And that's where kind of not only happiness comes from, but like new ideas come from. That the silence is where they come from, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I did want to move on to a couple of things in terms of, I guess, related to the microcomputing. Should we cover anything regarding the article about Cellebrite, about which phones were hackable or which aren't?
Oh, if you
Was there anything? I'm trying to remember. There was an article we had found that I was. That's a little bit of a different. This was from that 404media.co
yeah.
article by Joseph Cox. So I know that it's separate from AI, but it seemed interesting. But I can't see the whole thing. Subscriber only. I was
Yeah.
wondering if there's something in terms of like what phones are hacked, just as a public service announcement.
Yeah, and I can't. I mean, this has been a little bit of time now. Like at the time, I think we could see more of this article, but it was interesting that they were not able to unlock a bunch of the iPhones, and so whereas probably the other ones are hackable, and so again, I think that bodes well to the commitment that Apple has to privacy, right?
Okay.
And really, that's one of the key differentiators now. If you think about like the amongst the big tech companies, they're probably all if you go back to like Google's do no evil or whatever, they're probably all evil to some extent. It's just the lesser of the evils, and I think maybe Apple is probably the lesser of all of these big tech. Like I think if I had to go and rank them, I've done this before in our episodes, it's probably Facebook's probably the worst perpetrator, then it's Google, then probably Microsoft, and then Apple.
Yeah, that's true. That's Microsoft's kind of in the middle somewhere. Well, I guess if that's a good summary. I guess what we could do is we could go on to, I have an anecdote, and then we could talk about that. We'll come back to Notion, I guess, is the tip, and
Sure.
then we'll wrap it up. Is there anything else that we want to discuss before we move on to those two things?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of different topics today, so I'm sure it's a good, nice balance that we've done.
So I did want to mention a personal project. I wasn't actually going to mention it today, but because we talked about the microcomputing, that's why I integrated kind of the Raspberry Pi stuff. So if people are interested, and maybe I'll I think I'm going to write up a blog post about how I did this. But basically, several years ago from you, I purchased two old computers. I purchased an original Bondi Blue iMac from 1998. A Voodoo PC from the 90s. And you also I bought a Mac Pro, or is it Mac Pro, when it was not Intel, it was still Power PC, huge cheese grater style Mac desktop aluminum case. And so the aluminum case has been kind of a priority project. So what I did, and again, I'll write this up and maybe I'll share it in the next show notes. But I have a Raspberry Pi 4, so not a 5. A 5 would be better, but I have a 4 with 8 gigabytes of RAM. So I think it's a quad core processor, 8 gigs of RAM. And basically what I've done is that Raspberry Pi goes into a plastic enclosure with a fan, so it has active cooling. I opened up this Mac Pro case, and I have 3M'd the Raspberry Pi computer with a kind of a Velcro 3M to the back of it. I have put in a internal spinning drive, a terabyte drive within an enclosure. I've put that in this Mac Pro case, and then I fed the wires through the back. So now I have turned this huge Mac Pro case into it has this teeny tiny computer inside, and it runs a web server, a network attached storage from my house that's only available kind of on the local network. And so that's what I decided to do. So I think the whole project, I don't know what the case is worth. I didn't buy those cases from you for very much. So we'll maybe write that off as part of the cost. But I think the whole cost is maybe $175.
Yeah. And I mean that, it's funny because at the time we were actually thinking of using it. It was part of my company. We had two of them. And so we were going to make it into a table. So we were
like a glass top,
like a glass top on top of it, and then just use it as a little coffee table. And then I thought about it afterwards, and at the time I just wanted to clear out some space in my basement. But I even thought about it, and I think it's kudos to you to go and actually run with it. But yeah, using it either as a network attached storage, or I thought maybe you just make it into a big cable box
Right.
where you just, for all your cable management, you just throw it in there, because that thing, and this is where I don't know. I mean, maybe Apple, for some reason, they just keep going. They go big, thick, then they start going the opposite and getting as small and thin as possible. But that thing is a beast. I mean, it's made out of solid aluminum. It's pretty heavy. That's one of the reasons why, even like with my monitors, I sometimes even question like sure, it would be great to get like the new studio displays, but they're like $2,000. I picked up these like Thunderbolts. I have two Thunderbolts. I have one cinema display, and I mean, the thing's still running great, and it cost me like fraction of that, right? Especially if you get them like pre-owned.
Are they
So
1440p? They're not 4K.
yeah, they're 1440p. So, but not bad. They're pretty solid. They're heavy. They're heavy duty. They have pretty nice speakers built right into them. I mean, there's this new there's a Samsung 5K monitor that you can get. It doesn't even have speakers in it. So like, I don't know. There's some trade-offs that are happening. So
Yeah, my monitor is 28 inches. It's a 4K. It's an Acer. It has HDR. It's a decent panel. It's not the highest end, but it's a serviceable. It has a really terrible speaker in it, but I think I paid like $350 for this monitor. So like not a lot of money.
yeah, yeah. And I think I'm just kind of biased because I just like having like that Apple aesthetic where you have the aluminum. Like I have my Mac Mini right here that's aluminum. It's sitting here. I got even my webcam. It actually is a Logitech one, but it has that same finish and it has a magnet on it, so it just attaches right onto over top of the existing webcam that's built right into the Apple display. So, but
You have a good setup,
anyways,
and you're
yeah,
going to have to move it.
I'm gonna have to move it soon. So, but anyways, we'll see. We'll see what happens at that point. But yeah, continue with. I think it's a great project. I look forward to seeing your blog. You showed me what it looks like right before this. So yeah, I think it's awesome.
I'll take some better photos. Like, I mean, it's not a huge, it has a terabyte. They're slow drives. They're 5,400 RPM, not 7,200. But they're server NAS, network attached storage drives. I think they're Western Digital Reds. So they're made for long-term longevity. I don't know if they're still the best, but at the time they were very good.
Yeah.
Kind of workhorse drives. They're not going to, move data that fast, but they'll last a long time. And I've had two of them, and I've had them for years. So I had one lying around that I wasn't using. I actually had it as a time machine drive for my Mac. But I have a solid state external drive that's the same size. That's like this big. And so I just use that. I bought it to take it with me and to take it places, and I never do.
Yeah.
Everything I do fits on a 64 gig USB stick. I'm like, this is silly. So I just formatted that drive. So it's a very fast backup, automated backup. And then I just use the spinning drive and the storage, the network attached storage. But it's a terabyte. I don't know what I'm going to store on it. Could be good for my wife and I to share. Like I can create new users. The way I did it is that, and I can if I do a blog post, I can put a link to the instructions or put a link in the show notes for that matter. But I basically installed a Linux operating system called Raspberry Pi OS. So actually I can change the monitor input and I can boot right into it.
Okay.
But there's a bunch of terminal commands that are finicky and difficult to get to work. But basically what you do is that you format that drive for Linux. And then through the terminal commands, you basically say, after you formatted it, make this drive available on the network so it can be read and written to. And so there's other things you can do with network attached storage. If you go to a store and buy a network attached storage, they're much easier. You just plug it into your home router and then it'll just work. You'll be able to see it. You can log in with a password if you like. But they don't really run an operating system. I mean, they run some sort of custom software, so you can boot into it like Synology or something like that.
Yeah.
And you can do that with the Raspberry Pi. I have in the past, I have had a media center that ran Open Media Vault or one of those kind of customized, very lightweight operating systems. So the way I've done it uses up probably a lot more RAM, meaning that it's running a full operating system that can do like Windows level stuff in addition to having this drive sit there. So it's not the most efficient, but the reason I did that is that I have this Raspberry Pi with 8 GB of RAM. And there's no way a network attached storage is going to need 8 GB of RAM. That's a huge amount. So I thought, well, why not try to do both things at the same time? I can use it as a desktop computer.
Mm-hmm.
And I may try, I was thinking of doing a challenge where I tried to do a whole day's worth of work using that computer just to see if I could do it. It has Firefox, it has Chromium installed in it, so I can go on the web and I can do everything. I think video conferencing would break it. But then I can use that now and I can run it as a storage device. So I can do both.
Yeah.
I did have a tip for today, and I'll make it really quick since I already alluded to it. So I've been using this. I talked about it when we talked about our Zettelkasten episode, this tool called Notion for notes. It's kind of a note-taking project management software. I did not know this originally. I was using the free version, but Notion has, let me just bring up the pricing. So most people use Notion for free, and you probably don't need to do anything. You can do notes with live collaborative workspaces, 7 days of page history. You can invite 10 guests, analytics for nothing. Normally, Notion Plus is like $10 a month. And then you can get unlimited blocks for teams. You get unlimited file uploads, 30 days of page history, so like version control. You can invite 100 guests, so you can make notes public. And you can invite guests to collaborate on things like Google Docs. You can sync the databases with like third-party apps. You can create a custom website and host it publicly on Notion. So I can even, I think, share with you. I don't know if it'll work. The test website I made. So you can't use a custom domain for free, but you can use a custom. Oh no, that's not the right one. I'll find it in a second. Yeah, you can basically host a website through this platform, which is pretty sick. And you can do all this stuff. And now again, normally $10 a month, but if you're a student or an educator, you can actually do it for free. And so there's instructions on Notion on how to get the stuff for free as an educator. And basically you get everything that's included in the Plus. It's called Plus Plan for Education for individual students and teachers. I don't know if there's some cutbacks from the regular Plus Plan, but you can get that for free.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, if you want the AI integration, so I got this Plus Plan for free, and I was like, oh, this is great. I'm really happy with this. I can use all these things. And so they verified my my university address, so I can log in with. You have to log in with a university email account, and they verify it. That's how they know. Maybe there's another way if they don't recognize it. I log in, and I get a pop-up that says, "Hey, I don't know if it's I think it's just for the first year, so I don't know if I'll do it indefinitely. If you want to include AI into the Notion pricing." They will give it to you for a year if you buy it for a year for 50% off on the education plan. I don't know if it was specifically on the education plan or if it's a promo, but I'm pretty sure it's specifically if you start. So it'll renew at the full price of $10 per member per month. But if you add it to your workspace, I think you get it for $8 a month normally. If you so what does that cost? 8 times 12 is $96 a year, US, by the way. But then if you're on the education plan for the first year, they actually give it to you for a whole year for half of that. So it's $50 US or $47 US. And so I'm going to test this. I haven't tested it at great length. I've heard, based on my just research and looking at Reddit threads and stuff, that the AI integration. So this is kind of what Paul Thurrott was talking about, right? Like the chatbots are expensive. You're getting hosed for these prices. There's lots of competitors that do free stuff. The real value is when it's integrated into a project. So you can search your archive. You can work within a document you've already drafted to add content or to do kind of things in context. And so I'm really interested in looking this up. So I'm going to play with it and report back. But those are the deals you can get for Notion as an educator or a student. So that's pretty much it for the tip that I had. I think that's pretty sick. So I'm gonna kind of use it as my daily driver for notes, and we'll see.
Okay, awesome.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot. It's been good to kind of get back into it. We've been busy for the last little bit, so hopefully we can get things a little bit more regular. But I mean, we did make this conscious choice. We'll go and discuss topics that make sense and so on.
Yeah, well, we kind of release them when we can. Yeah. Okay. Well, right. Until next time, thanks for all of you for listening, and I'll talk to you later, Kris.
All right. It's always a pleasure. Thanks.
Likewise. Take care.